What soul winning is not. If you look at that first page, there's nothing for you to write down in that, but I want you to understand this principle. I think this really changed my mind towards soul winning whenever I realized this concept here, okay? Here's what I realized is that whenever I was going out, and I would say 80-90% of churches today, their evangelistic program is like this, okay? Upside down. Here's what they do, and I'm gonna start in the middle there. Oftentimes, their entire program is leaving a tract on the door. And I've seen people say, hey, we're going out soul winning today, and then they say, we handed out 1,000 tracts or 1,000 door hangers. Now, is that a bad thing to do? No, that's a good thing to do. You're putting the gospel on the doors. I'm happy with that. Statistically speaking, most soul winners have come to this conclusion. It takes something like 1,000 tracts on the doors. Now, we don't know what happens, who reads them and what happens from that, but it takes about 1,000 tracts on the doors to possibly get one person to come into the church as a result of getting that tract, okay? So a better approach would be to actually invite them to church, look them in the eyeballs, invite them to church. And so that would be like the second step that most churches do. Okay, so here's what they'll say. They'll say, I went to and I'm not knocking the guy, but he invited other churches to come out and help. And it was a great idea. He and I talked about it, and we thought that would be great. And people reciprocate, now we'll go to your church, and then you guys come to our church. And the idea was to go out and help them to go door knocking. But he made up these cards, and the entire time the only purpose was to put those cards on the door. And really, the cards didn't even have the gospel on them, right? And he said, our goal is to hit every door in the town in this one day. And he says, so we figured it out. You got about 1 minute to get from one door to the next door, and you're just going to put these on all the doors. Sound like a great idea, because everyone's getting an invitation to the church. Probably got a link to the website that gives the gospel or something like that. But I remember thinking, all these preachers came. All these people that actually know how to lead someone to the Lord and can actually knock on the door and lead someone to the Lord, and all they're doing is putting tracts on the door. We could pay a mailman to do that. You could just send out a mass mailer to everybody in the town. I know it costs some money, but I'm saying that what we really need are people that can give the gospel to somebody. And so I'm all for leaving tracts. I'm all for inviting people to church. And by the way, if you physically, look at them, if you're got a good personality, I guess. I'm sure some people, we might not want to represent the church out there inviting folks to come. But most people, if you look there and you smile at them and you're nice and you say, hey, we'd love to come for you to come to church, they're a lot more likely to come than just by getting a random letter on their door, right? So that would be the next step. And so then they'll say, now, if you get the chance, right? And here's what the guy said whenever we went door knocking. He said, or I say blitzing is what some people call it. He said, now, I'm not saying if somebody is there and you're talking to them and they're like, hey, what must I do to be saved? Don't give them the gospel. I'm just saying that our goal is to get in the door, So it was almost like the last result. The last step is if somebody actually is there and they do strike up a conversation, by all means, give them the gospel, right? Well, what I realized is that is exactly turning it upside down of what we're supposed to do, okay? When we knock on a door, I believe our purpose should be, I am here to present this person with the gospel and lead them to Christ, right? I know not everybody's going to be led to Christ. And I know some people might even say a prayer to get you off their door. I understand that happens. But my goal is to present to them a clear message. All right, I'm going to talk about that in tomorrow's lesson. A clear presentation of the gospel. And then give them a chance to call on the Lord and be saved. Now, if they say, I don't have time to listen to you, or I'm not interested right now, or I think I already have that settled, or whatever, you've at least put something in their hand and you've said, well, you know where we are, the address is on there, the times of the services, our phone number, and all that's on there. We'd love to see you come sometime. Maybe you left a good impression and maybe they'll come. If something happens in their life, I've seen this happen a lot, they don't come, but months later they do come and say, hey, I'm really trying to get my life right, all these things are going wrong. And that just tells me that there was some impression left. Last time you talked to that person and met with them, that they said, that's the person I need to go to, right? And so then by all means, if they do not want to hear the gospel, you're still going to invite them to church. You're still going to give them that invitation. And if nobody's home, you're still putting the tract on the door, which is what you would be doing anyway if you were just going around putting tracts on doors, right? So really, you're still accomplishing that. It's just taking you a longer amount of time to make sure everybody gets one of those tracts. But the first priority is I'm trying to get a conversation where I can present the gospel. Okay? So what most folks are doing is completely turning that upside down, and we want to make sure that our priorities are straight. So here are, next page 16, here are 3 things that soul winning is not. All right, and I hear people use the term soul winning because it sounds really good, but a lot of times what they're doing is not really soul winning. Soul winning is not inviting people to church. Inviting people to church is a great thing, And if somebody absolutely is terrified, doesn't know how to present the gospel, they're really scared, I understand that, all right? And that's why we'll talk about partnering up as a silent partner and all that, because I would never want to make somebody go soul winning who's terrified. I know what that feels like, and that would just make them clam up and never want to come, right? So that's not what I'm wanting to do. And worst case scenario, not worst case scenario, but if you absolutely don't want to give the gospel to somebody, then I would say the next thing to do would be give them one of those tracts and say, we'd love to have you come to church sometime. And if you get a chance, why don't you read what's inside there? It talks about how you can know you're going to heaven when you die. We can do that. That's pretty simple, right? Most people say thank you. No matter what they're thinking, they're usually going to say, well, thank you, I'll read that. Even if they don't. It's really not that there's not that much to lose with inviting somebody. So it's a good thing. But really, that's not soul winning. Okay. Number 2, soul winning is not debating or arguing. All right. And I think sometimes that's one of the things that people are afraid about when it comes to going soul winning or approaching somebody and asking them about the condition of their soul, is you're afraid that it's going to end up in some debate. They're going to ask me a question. I don't know the answer. I'm not going to know where to find it in the Bible. And sometimes that can be real, you can get real paranoid about that. But when you realize this, that soul winning is not debating, it's not arguing, that can actually bring you some comfort, okay? Remember this, when we go soul winning, particularly door to door, but even if you're going to someone's car or they're walking down the road and you go to them, you're approaching them as an uninvited guest, right? They didn't say, hey, come over and give me the gospel. That's a different kind of a visit altogether. You're approaching them as an uninvited guest, and so you want to be polite. You don't want to be aggressive and just cross the line. I mean, those are the kind of guys that will get us, get soul winning shut down in the town. They have ordinances that they're a little bit stricter on in Overland Park about no soliciting. Some neighborhoods, they all have these no soliciting signs, and I read up on that to make sure what the laws are, and it includes people giving the gospel. And I'll just tell you right now, I still knock on them. All right, I wouldn't tell anybody that they have to do that, because I realize that could be rude. About 8 or 9 out of 10 times, they don't say a word to you. They still talk to you. If they're not interested, they'll say they're not interested. You can go on. There's always that 1 out of 10 people that says, didn't you read the sign that says no soliciting? My thought on that is I just want them to hear the gospel. Okay, if they get mad at me, I'll say, hey, I'm sorry. I'm not going to argue and say, well, this isn't actually soliciting, right? Some people will do that. They'll get in this big debate about, well, the law says, blah, blah, blah. You're at their house, an uninvited guest. If they say, if they are on the other side of the door and they say, no, thank you, you say, okay, have a nice day. I always leave a tract still, but, right? You're not sitting there trying to get into a debate with them. And I'm getting ahead of myself for tomorrow's lesson, but when you're actually presenting the gospel, you're also not looking at debating doctrine, right? You're going to give them the plan of salvation, and I'll talk about that in tomorrow's lesson, a little bit about when some of these other things come up, and you have to deal a little bit with a certain doctrinal issue. But for the most part, you have a plan, and you're saying, hey, would you like me to show you this plan? to show you what the Bible says about how you can know you go to heaven. Every once in a while somebody will say, sure, why don't you show me? And then that's what you're looking for, right? When they say, no, thank you, I'm not interested. There's other approaches. There's things that you can do to kind of just at least get a verse in there, or say, hey, well, at least will you read the tract or whatever. But what you're not trying to do is get into a debate. You're not trying to, and I don't think anybody here would do that, but I'm just letting you know that this is the philosophy, okay? You're not like, well, you're going to go to hell if you don't listen to me. There's a time and place for that, but this isn't it. You're at their door, okay? So we want, and here's the other thing about that. If I knock on their door and they're kind of rude to me, and I've seen this happen before. In fact, one guy called the church. Maybe you've heard me tell this story, but he called the church. He was really rude to us when we were at his door. And I just politely excused myself and said, have a nice day. Later, he called the church and said, hey, I just wanted to apologize to whoever was knocking on my door earlier, and I was really mean with them. And so he thought about that for a little while. But here's the thing. Next time someone knocks on his door, right, there's an opportunity. A door's still open. Now, if I would have been, who do you think you are, yelling at me like that, and started this aggressive fight with him, boy, now he would just be totally turned off to the gospel and anybody knocking on his door. So we want to be very careful when we knock on doors to realize we're uninvited. We're just trying to be friendly. I'm not going to debate their religion or their doctrinal beliefs necessarily. Now, I'll tell them what I believe from the Bible, and I'll show it to them, but I'm not going to engage in a big argument. Okay, number 3, and we've already talked about this a little bit, but soul winning is not literature distribution. It's not literature distribution. Now, I'm not totally against that. I watched this video one time somebody made called The Silent Witness. And this lady, she couldn't speak English very well, but she wanted to be a witness. And she was, I don't know what, she was a foreign exchange student or something. And she just gave out all these gospel tracts, right? Because she couldn't speak the language very well, but she could at least give those. And I guess there's reports of all these people getting saved or something. Look, I'm not against distributing literature, but that's not what we're talking about when we talk about soul winning. That would be just literature distribution, all right? All right, soul winning is this. Soul winning is looking someone in the eye and confronting. Now, the word confronting might sound bad, but we're not talking about being belligerent and combative and aggressive in that way, but we are confronting them about the matter of their eternal soul in hopes of being able to share the gospel with them and winning them to Christ. Now, we're not all, not everyone we talk to obviously is going to be won to Christ. In fact, it's a pretty small percentage, which is why we got to knock on so many doors and why we don't want to waste time on a door when they're not interested, right? Because there are a lot of other people out there that might want to hear. So it's kind of like this. The Bible said, Jesus said, I will make you fishers of men. That's what he told his disciples. Follow me, I will make you fishers of men. Isn't that an interesting illustration that he gave? Fishing, right? I don't know about you, I love fishing, but there are some days I've gone out there for an entire day and not caught one fish. But I was still fishing, right? You know what I mean? I was still fishing, I just wasn't catching anything. And then there's been other days, you hit this nest of fish and you catch a whole bunch of them, right? And you praise the Lord for those days. Well, it's the same with soul winning, all right? That doesn't imply that's our only goal is to win people. That's our primary goal. We want them to get saved. But we realize that, and I heard somebody say it this way, it's more of soul warning, all right? We're telling them that if they don't accept Christ, that they'll die and go to hell. Not doing that in a rude or ugly way, but that's the ultimate thing that we're doing is warning. But we really want to just offer them salvation and show them what the Bible says about it, okay? Lesson 4.